Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 13th of December 2012. My name is TotalBiscuit, bringing you around 20 minutes of gaming news and comment. My apologies for not having an episode yesterday. Things went horribly wrong. And occasionally that happens, unfortunately. That's just the way of it. We don't really have anyone that can fill in for me. If I can't do it, then that's kind of it. So, my apologies for missing out on an episode, but hopefully we're back on track right about now. So, coming up on the show, Steam launches real money-based community market. The Secret World is making subscriptions optional. Crytek considering free-to-play multiplayer for Crysis 2 and 3. A dispute ensues over the rights to the S.T.A.L.K.E.R franchise. SimCity showing off trailer with intercity multiplayer gameplay. And Hotline Miami torrented to extraordinary levels. Steam has launched into beta a community marketplace which allows for players to exchange in-game items such as Team Fortress 2 hats for Steam Wallet cash. The current system only works with Team Fortress 2, although there are obviously expectations that it will expand to the whole range of Steam trading system-enabled games, which include things like Super Monday Night Combat, as well as Portal, Spiral Knights, and a few other things. At present, there is a 200-item limit, which will be kicking in per calendar year during the beta. And that's the weird thing, isn't it? Because this is probably not going to be all that relevant, since I would imagine it's not going to be in beta for over a year. Although, you never know, considering how long it's taken them for TF2 to actually get to a releasable state, even though it's perfectly fine now. I guess they may very well want to drag it out. A quote here from Tony Paloma from Valve says, with over 500,000 trades made every week, the trading system has been very successful. Extending game economies beyond trades and giving players a way to turn gameplay into funds for new items and games is a key component of moving that success forward. Now, we should, of course, point out that Valve takes a 15% cut of the actual transactions, so yes, it is absolutely a way of moving it forward. It's also a way of Valve making a lot more money. But honestly, it's not something I personally mind all that much because this, again, was happening anyway. And we're not talking about trading for items that are actually very, very useful in-game. We're talking about hats. We're talking about things that can otherwise be acquired very easily that aren't going to break the imbalance. I think there's a rather large difference between what you do with Diablo 3, where it's a game that's essentially based entirely on looking for random loot, versus a game like TF2, where you get some of the best items at the very start, and acquiring items is actually very, very easy in the long run. Now, some would argue that this actually is exactly the same as something like Diablo 3, because the cosmetic items being the most valuable doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if they're cosmetic or not. What matters is the fact that you are essentially selling in-game items and creating a marketplace for it. Well, personally, again, I would disagree, because in Diablo 2, especially in Inferno mode, a lot of the items that you actually needed were necessary in order for progress, whereas in Team Fortress 2, that clearly is not the case by any stretch of the imagination. Now, this trading was going on already, so what this does is allows for a safe way of doing it. Once again, you can compare that to Diablo 3 and say, well, it was happening in Diablo 2 as well, but in reality, this is not something that involved the vast majority of players, and again, is something that definitely affected the actual in-game balance, which is not what's going to be occurring with the community marketplace. Absolutely not. Most of the stuff that's going to be sold will be hats, there's no question. Acquiring weapons is not difficult. Acquiring rare hats, that is certainly more difficult. These things sometimes go for hundreds of dollars on the unofficial grey market, so having an official way of doing this makes perfect sense. Personally, it doesn't affect me because I don't really play a lot of TF2 or anything like that, but it's an interesting system. The question, I suppose, is how far does it go? Which other games does it end up being incorporated into? And is it incorporated into games that would actually be damaged by the notion of encouraging the sale of items? As I pointed out with Diablo 3, the fact of the matter is the entire game is based around the fact that the auction house exists. This is not the case with existing Valve titles, so my hope is that we don't see titles later on that are built around the idea that this system is there, and indeed it is necessary to use it, which is something that I would point out for Diablo 3 was in fact required for Inferno mode with the auction house system. So, for the moment, it's positive. Let's just see where it goes, and hopefully we don't see a rash of games developed for the sole purpose of milking the idea of selling virtual items. It's been announced that the Secret World, about 5 months after launch, is going to get rid of the subscriptions. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it goes free to play. You do still, in fact, have to buy the box, but the subscription model for the Secret World is now no longer required. Subscriptions have been converted over to something a little bit optional. The $15 subscription stays for those who actually want it, and if they do keep it, they get $10 of bonus items and a free gift every month, as well as a 10% discount for the Real Money store and a reusable experience booster. Those of you who happen to have lifetime subscriptions, they will get an additional 10% discount on top of that. The game's director, Joey Bylos, said, "We tried to be a responsible subscription company and release something every month to give value for that money. Ignoring that I work here, I felt as a gamer that this is what I'd want to see from a subscription game." The thing is, it hasn't really paid off in the end, so we have to make some changes to bring people in. But in terms of subscriptions dying, Blizzard are laughing at us from atop their thrones. Whenever I hear people say that subs are dead, I point to the biggest moneymakers in the industry. But that's the problem, isn't it? You can point at WoW. The problem is WoW is the exception that proves the rule. Name one other game in the West that has a lot of subscribers. You can't, can you? Because it doesn't exist. There's one other notable exception, and that's EVE Online. That appears to be successful, but it offers such a radically different thing from something like World of Warcraft. But honestly, aside from that, WoW is the big one. WoW is the only one. WoW continues to endure because WoW is such a potent property that people are willing to pay $15 a month to take part in it. However, if they want a different experience that isn't World of Warcraft, they have a ton of different options that don't require a subscription fee. I mean, what's the point in releasing a game in a marketplace where Guild Wars 2 exists for free, and where you've got stuff like Lotro, DC Universe, DDO, now the Old Republic, Raiders, PlanetSide 2, you've got all sorts of different MMO experiences that you can try for pretty much as long as you want without actually paying a dime, and then when you're ready and you feel like it's a good idea, then you can throw some money at it. And here's the problem with MMOs, more often than not, you go into it and the initial experience is great, and then once you hit level 20 or whatever, you find there's a dearth of content, or maybe you just rush up to max level and then you find, oh, where's the end game? There isn't one. They didn't bother to put one in because they assumed that we'd spend a lot longer on the leveling content. So, honestly, you can laugh all you damn well please if you happen to be Blizzard, but the only chance you get to do that is if you are Blizzard. There is no other really successful subscription-based game right now. It does not exist. They are all pretty much in the dirt in comparison to free-to-play MMOs. And honestly, I don't think there's going to be a sub-based game again for a very, very long time. The free-to-play business model works better, and honestly, if they'd launched with a free-to-play business model from the very start, even if they'd sold the game, they'd sold it for $60 but had no sub fee, they would have been much, much more successful. Just bear in mind that The Secret World had a triple whammy. It had a boxed copy for $60, then you had to pay $15 a month, and then there was a cash shop on top of that. Now that is triple dipping. That is far too much. You can do boxed copy and sub for a while. That's what happened with the Old Republic. Yeah, it worked for a few months, and then people got sick of it and left, and that's what's going to end up happening, and people are completely put off trying it because they know they're going to have to pay $60 and then $15 a month. That's not necessarily an economical way of doing it, and it works out well if you happen to be a guy that really adores the game, but how do you know that? You haven't had the chance to play it. Generally speaking, MMOs don't release with trials these days, and when they do, they're very restrictive, and generally not representative of the entire product. So, it's about time, really. I'm glad that they did this, considering that a couple of months ago they were saying, no way, we're not going free to play or anything like that. This is okay. There's still a barrier to entry, certainly, the $60, but that at least helps a little bit. It helps people just get on board and try it out. And honestly, The Secret World is one of the more interesting MMOs out there right now. And my hope is that in a year or so, assuming the damn thing lives, that it actually develops into a really, really good MMO. They tighten up the combat, they bring in more story elements, they really, really put a lot of emphasis on the mythos, which they're doing already, but they do that even more. They stock up the endgame content to make sure PvP is varied enough, and they generally provide an interesting looking product. We will see how this turns out for them. I'm hoping it doesn't go under. I mean, there's many, many games that definitely deserve to go under before The Secret World does. But again, their launch was arrogant, most likely the fault of EA, and it was not as good as they had hoped, not by any stretch of the imagination. This is a positive step forward for the game, I feel. It might be something that I revisit at some point when I get the time, but when it comes to MMOs, there's like one that I can play, and even then, I'm barely dipping into it, so it doesn't look like I'll be seeing much of that game anytime soon. Further news on the subject of Crytek and its transition through to free-to-play. You may remember, of course, that the publisher was pretty adamant and vocal about free-to-play being the future for games, as well as the future for its franchise titles. And once they'd wrapped up with Crysis 3, it was very likely that the next titles we were seeing from them would, in fact, be free-to-play. At this point, they're considering a whole bunch of things, including the notion of making the multiplayer for Crysis 2 free, and they had considered it for Crysis 3, but apparently it did not happen. This is most likely due to the fact, of course, that Crysis 3 is very much an EA-published game, and they have not actually jumped in with both feet when it comes to dealing with the free-to-play market on the PC. The stuff that they've created for free-to-play has actually been pretty awful, and they haven't really been allowing these full, big-budget box titles to utilize free-to-play elements. EA is more into making specific free-to-play versions of franchises like EA Sports FIFA Superstars, Battlefield Play for Free, the Tiberian Alliance's Facebook game, which is god-awful. And it even seemed like they were hesitant to actually move the Old Republic over to free-to-play, so I would imagine that's probably what's restricting them. However, there's a couple of things they, of course, need to bear in mind. For one, Crytek has had great success in Russia, typically a region which is pretty heavy on piracy, with its free-to-play shooter Warface, which is heading over to the West sooner rather than later, and I'm looking forward to getting my hands on it because it looks pretty good. And they also had issues with Crysis and Crysis 2. They were pirated on a massive scale. They were looking at Crysis 2 being the most pirated game in 2011, and back in 2008, the chief executive for Crytek estimated that only 5% of the copies being played were actually legitimate, so that's one legit buyer for every 20 pirates. Free-to-play is, of course, one of the ways to combat this, and in fact, it's not entirely surprising we're seeing a lot of games going in this direction, because it's very difficult to pirate a game that's already free. People ask and scream from the rooftops, why is everything going free-to-play now? Well, there's your frickin' answer, unfortunately. That's the way that things are going, and quite frankly, companies don't want to deal with rampant piracy on PC. But they do want to sell to PC gamers, so free-to-play is their solution and their compromise, and quite frankly, it's probably the best compromise they can come up with. It's either that or truly invasive DRM, and honestly, nobody really wants that. So playing multiplayer games in a free-to-play model that has a lot of server-side storage, which is essentially DRM in and of itself, is probably the best way of doing it. It's a sad state of affairs, but at the end of the day, if you're going to have 95% piracy rate in a really expensive game, then I don't see how gamers can be surprised at the way things are going. A rather odd dispute has erupted over the rights to the S.T.A.L.K.E.R franchise, with the publisher of S.T.A.L.K.E.R Call of Pripyat, BitComposer, claiming that it has in fact acquired the exclusive rights worldwide for the distribution and creation of future S.T.A.L.K.E.R titles. BitComposer is quoted as saying that S.T.A.L.K.E.R is a reputable brand with a long history of success and naturally would like to tap into the success of the series, and we see a great deal of potential for the future. However, a spokesman for GSC Game World claims in an email to Gama Sutra that, in view of the rumors appearing in press, we find it necessary to inform that GSC Game World and Sergei Grigorovich remain the sole owners of all the intellectual property rights to the S.T.A.L.K.E.R game series and the brand overall, including the trademarks, the game universe, the technology, etc., and that can be easily verified with the online trademark services. He also goes on to be somewhat more damning, saying that we have doubts regarding the mentioned product by BitComposer, the publisher of S.T.A.L.K.E.R Call of Pripyat in some territories, since the latter has significant debts in terms of fulfilling the obligations under the existing contract between our companies. So there's some funny business going on here. Now, there is a theory that what has happened is that in fact BitComposer has actually acquired the rights to create some kind of game based on Roadside Picnic. Now, Roadside Picnic is the original novel that essentially inspired the S.T.A.L.K.E.R film and the S.T.A.L.K.E.R games. It was released in the 70s, and it was by the Strugatsky brothers. Now, as far as BitComposer is concerned, the Strugatsky brothers own the license to S.T.A.L.K.E.R and Roadside Picnic and everything associated with it, and GSC actually never had the license to S.T.A.L.K.E.R. So there's some very curious things going on here, and if you want to look at this from a positive standpoint, you can say, hey, great, there's a new S.T.A.L.K.E.R game, they're actually interested in making something. From a negative standpoint, a massive legal battle could delay or even cancel pretty much any S.T.A.L.K.E.R game that could ever come our way. So this is mixed news, to say the least, and I'll let you know how it develops. Maxis has been showing off some new features to SimCity and showing in detail the actual multiplayer functionality, which has in fact been dogged by so much controversy since it is linked into always on DRM. In a trailer video, which you can watch in full by clicking the link in the description below this video and is running in the background right now, you will be able to see about 6 minutes of SimCity with the addition of regional cities played by your friends, and in doing so they were able to demonstrate the ability to share resources such as power as well as emergency services. Also reiterated in the video is the game's upgrade system, which allows you to purchase add-on upgrades within your city for the various different buildings that you have constructed. Now, my opinion on all of this is I'm kind of warming to it to some degree, in the sense that, oh, this kind of regional thing is pretty cool, but I think for the most part, I'm just going to want to play this solo, so this whole always-on DRM thing is not actually beneficial to me. It's especially not beneficial if I happen to be out at an event or whatever and I have dodgy internet, which is pretty frequent when you have to stay in a bunch of hotels, or if I wanted to play this while traveling. And that kind of sucks, honestly. SimCity would have been a very, very nice portable game that would be ideal for a lot of trips out to various different states while I'm doing events and things like that. That's pretty awesome. But it's hard to really argue with the system in question. It looks nice. I mean, it's very much based on stuff that's happened in previous SimCity games. I do have some concerns about it. It seems like it's infinitely exploitable. The notion that, oh, I don't want pollution, so I'm going to dump all my coal power plants in a different region. The idea being that you could just create a city which is designed to take all your garbage and have all the pollution and everything like that. And it seems like when he constructed the power plant, everyone just commuted from the other city. You didn't even need any houses there. So, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how they actually balance this out. The game is coming out on March the 5th, 2013. Although, I also have to say that they're doing some day one DLC, which is available via the Collector's Edition if you pre-order, which I'm definitely not happy with, because it's by far not simply a cosmetic edition. It's actually a whole superheroes and villains thing that will be purchasable separately or comes with the collector's edition on day one. And you know how I get when it comes down to day one DLC, but I'll keep an eye on it and see how it turns out. It may very well be that the pros outweigh the cons, but at the moment it's looking like it's going to be yet another EA released game that is not exactly consumer friendly in many areas. And finally, a follow-up to the Hotline Miami piracy story, in which the developer of the game was actually giving help to pirates in order to get his game running properly. The game, as a result, appears to have been torrented to, quote, extraordinary levels. Project manager Graham Struthers said it's been torrented to such a staggering level, and given the file size of it, I mean, you can't really be surprised. On the subject of the game's actual developer helping out pirates in the first place, Struthers explained that that's what he's like. He just felt he didn't want people playing the buggy version of his game, however they got it. I'm not going to criticize this, it's a fact of life. It would be nice if guys could find it within themselves to pay for it, but that's the world I'm in, so you know, you just have to take it for what it is. However, there is of course good news, because in 7 weeks the title has sold 130,000 copies, which is not too shabby at all for a PC-specific indie release. So this is a tricky one, because you end up in this situation where you think, okay, which is true, or are they both true? Did piracy increase as a result of the publicity for the game that was generated by the initial piracy, and the fact that the pirated version actually was bug fixed and worked properly? Or was there an increase in sales as a result of said publicity, or both? Well, what's more likely is both. Piracy tends to grow with the amount of sales that a game has, because the game gets popular, so some people buy it and some people don't buy it. 130,000 sold in the first 7 weeks is certainly not awful by any stretch of the imagination, but I feel that a game like that does in fact deserve a little bit more. I don't know how happy the developer and, of course, the publisher Devolver Digital actually are about this. That's what I really want to hear from. I want to hear from Devolver and ask them, is 130,000 units a good number? Because it's really hard to say. I mean, PC digital distribution is such a murky area because, of course, we have this really annoying situation of Steam flat out refusing to release sales figures. So we don't know. I mean, is 130,000 units a good number for a PC indie game? We have no idea. And that's actually a huge pain in the ass. I really wish Valve would resolve that. It would make things an awful lot clearer. But one way or the other, it kind of sucks that the game was pirated so much, but it's also kind of good that it was also bought so much. And I guess you're going to have to accept that piracy is going to be a reality of the industry, but I feel the last thing you want to do is really encourage it. The question, I suppose, has to be, was the patching of the pirated game and the tech support actually encouraging piracy, or was it just simply a olive branch put out there to the existing ones that says, you know what, I'm here, I'm available to help, I just want you to enjoy my game, and if you like it, can you please pay for it? We don't know. I would love to see a more detailed analysis on that and what actually happened, but it's a really odd situation, and it's certainly worth keeping an eye on. Alright folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.